My name is Martin Brynskov. I'm the moderator and chair of this session, the eGovernment and Digitalisation of Public Services, Policy Lab 1. So please ensure that you're in the right room, that you actually want to talk about and discuss. Also online, the digitalization of e-government and public services. Otherwise, go to the other rooms. Before I invite our speakers on the stage, maybe we could get the Slido up just to have the practicalities here. Because also online, we need to ensure that you are in the right room. Can you see in the top right corner, it says Policy Lab 1. So on your screen, it should also say Policy Lab 1, e-government and something, because otherwise you will be commenting on the other rooms, and that would be quite confusing, wouldn't it? And we will use the Slido also in this session. So welcome very much. I will start by inviting our panelists and discussants in this session onto the stage. And in a good virtual fashion, we will start by bringing a face on a screen. Jean-Francois Junger, the Deputy Head of Unit for the Public Services from European Commission. Very welcome, sir, here in the room. Can you hear us? I guess that's a no. Okay, so while technicalities are being looked into, I will bring the bodies on stage here. First one being Matthew Cain, Head of Digital, London Borough of Hackney. Welcome on stage. Matthew has been with the Borough of Hackney for a year, more or less, now, and is doing it on the ground, so looking very much forward to having your perspective on this. Kitty Kubo, welcome. The Innovation Manager for the Health Cluster here in Tallinn, the Science Park. Also,
I can hear you loud.
Okay, very good. We are happy to have you here. We will return to the virtual faces again. Thank you. So Innovation Manager, and also in your research, you've been looking into how to actually organize innovation in this domain. Very welcome to you. We have David Hope of Coventry and Warwickshire, the Innovation Program Manager. So again, but from a local government perspective. Welcome, sir. Very happy to have you here. And we have a well-known face, Laurent Frideres from ESPON, and thank you also for joining us in this session. So, Jean-Francois, back to you. Can you hear us? Can you see us? Okay. Can he speak? All right. So we will come back to the question of voice in the digital era. Do we have an estimate on whether Jean-Francois will be able to join the session? Okay. It's very impolite, I think, to start without all hands on. But Jean-Francois, as soon as you can, please let us know that you are here, that you can hear us. And perhaps the team could also give us a short note. So we are going to...
I can hear you and I can see you.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Welcome. Let's give technology a hand. Jean-Francois, very happy to have you here, and you can still hear us. Can you still see us? Yeah, fantastic. Either it's the online connection or it's the PowerPoint that you cannot get to work. I think we will slowly get started.
Jean-Francois can hear us, but there is a lag, there is a delay in the connection.
Okay, a profound lag, right? Like in 10, 20 minutes, seconds. Okay, Jean-Francois, we will try to manage, and I let the team optimize as we go along. Very welcome here in the panel. So, before I give you the floor and introduce yourselves, maybe you can have a think about how we can make this session focusing on the topics that are most relevant to you here in the audience. And I certainly invite you to, let's say, highlight and bring to the forefront what you find most challenging, most interesting, most timely to discuss. So we heard in the opening plenary from the overview from Paul and from Laurent, there's plenty of work to be done. But let's focus a little bit on then how does government, how do the public services then actually get digitalized? This is not a trivial move. It is, of course, about efficiency. Yes, we know digital services can be more efficient. But increasingly, it's actually touching on the very nature of government. So before, you could take the streets and throw the guys out if you weren't happy. Now, where's the switch? Where's the button? Where do you live when you are also online and everywhere? And as someone mentioned this morning, in your bed. So how do you even interface? How do you even interact? How do you even conceive what is government in this day and age? So there we have fundamental questions about what is e-government. Now, another thing is that is the power even switching? So we have big global players entering. Much of our time spent on the mobile devices is not interacting with your local government as you were walking down the street. It's interacting with online services coming out of the US mainly. So there's a real shift in your, let's say, the actual interface to these services. So, of course, how does the public react to that? How do the stakeholders around government react to that? But also, how does government react to that? And how should, if we can be normative about this, how should government react to that? Then we can, of course, look at the different sectors, see where the different levels of maturity, we could say, or transformation, how they are progressing. We can also have the territorial perspective and have a discussion about, okay, is it exactly the same template we should use, or are there actually individual differences, even if we look at the different levels of government? There's plenty to discuss. But I think we will start with a short introduction by the panelists, and while you introduce yourselves, we should have you give your say about what do you think is the most urgent topics to discuss. And for that, we will use the Slido as well. And I think maybe we can put it up and show it to you, and then while the panelists, the discussants, they introduce themselves, you take your choices, and then we use that as a reflection for the rest. So maybe we can put up the Slido here now. There's a bit of lag. Very good. So, about the digital transformation public institution, which topics would you like to be further discussed? And we have the citizen engagement and participation. Now, this is only not, just bear in mind, this is also about, you know, the relationship between the public and the services. All the opportunities as well as the challenges. I'm certain we can put all security and privacy in there. The leadership strategy, if you want to know more about the organizational, the strategic moves that can be made, we can discuss those. Skills, reskilling, attracting talent, funding, both your own funding if you have some, and also what instruments are available. There's a host of instruments that we could discuss, and I'm sure that the colleagues here on stage have very practical knowledge about. There's the whole partnership dimension, and then there's, of course, economic development locally, meaning jobs. So please ensure that you are in Policy Lab 1 when you do your polling, so you can see this, and then let us know what you think we should focus on. Okay, but back to the speakers, and I will give you 3 to 5 minutes to introduce yourselves and your initial thoughts on being here. We should see, Jean-Francois, if you are, in fact, ready with us. If not immediately, I would say we take you as the last presenter. So by that, the internet should have caught up with the speech here. Okay, so Matthew, first, could you introduce yourself and give a few pointers to the audience on what you feel is most pressing when we discuss digitalization? Why is it not just trivial and just do your job and do it?
Right, so firstly, what a privilege it is to be able to talk about digitalisation in Tallinn, in Estonia, the heart of e-government. So thank you very much. I am feeling nervous, impatient, and slightly pessimistic, all for a Thursday morning. Why? Because government is a legacy organisation. And legacy organisations haven't just struggled to adapt to digitalisation, mostly they failed. Blockbuster, retail outlets, mostly they haven't succeeded in rising to this challenge. And I don't feel sufficient impetus and progress has been made given where we are today. There are three key things, I think, that are on my mind. The first is that digitalisation in and of itself does not make anything better. I joined an organisation in Hackney Council. I previously worked in a more rural area called Buckinghamshire, slightly outside of London. Both organisations have put a lot of things online and done it very badly. They've taken paper forms and they put them on the internet. The service is still rubbish. So digitalisation in and of itself does not make anything better. What I'm really interested in is whole-scale change, which rethinks the business model, the value proposition, as well as the way that citizens interact with us. The second thing, therefore, is that the approach of our national government, which I'm sure is completely correct, but the approach of our government digital service was to digitise the highest volume transactional services. Seemed the smart thing to do, probably was in a central government context. But in local government, where we deliver services to citizens, actually some of the services that are most in need of rethinking for a digital era aren't those used by most citizens, where actually early phase introduction of computers has reduced the cost per unit of providing those services. It's those services which are relatively low volume, but where the cost is high. Looking after children, for example, transporting elderly people to hospital. There are lots of services which we provide in an era built for Queen Victoria, and we're still providing them in much the same way in 2017. The third thing, therefore, is that the challenge around digitisation is not a technocratic one. It's about adaptive change, and there are political choices involved in that. I fear that we have siloed our thinking, certainly in a UK context. We have made this about the delivery of public services. We haven't made it about democracy. We haven't made it about citizen engagement. We've just made it about the digitisation of public services. And we've suggested there are no political choices. You can have better services, yay! Lower cost, yay! What politician couldn't support better services at lower cost? Yet fundamentally, that's approaching it with the wrong set of strategies and tactics. This is about adaptive change, not technocratic change, and so requires a different approach.
It's quite skeptical for a Wednesday morning.
It is, but I'm also excited because I think the scale of the potential to do differently is so great, and the opportunity for resetting the way that government is organised around citizens' needs is so profound that what we could achieve is genuinely transformative. It's just we haven't even begun to run that race.
So let's keep that note. We haven't even begun. I think that's a fairly, let's say, interesting start. It's not like the future is already here and we have done a lot of stuff. Actually, some of the profound challenges, is what I'm hearing, have not even been addressed yet.
So I speak only as a citizen of the United Kingdom and someone who paid 4 parking fines for speeding in France on my summer holiday. So I have very little knowledge beyond the United Kingdom, I hasten to add.
Well, I can reflect then, representing more than 100 cities around the world. It's universal, I would say. Very good. Kitty, let's jump to you. You come from a sectoral perspective mainly, but I think addressing the same dynamics. So may you just introduce yourself and give your view on this digital transformation of one of the key public services in the healthcare domain. But you feel free to generalize.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I was probably invited here was the fact that I'm part of the Tehnopol group team, who is just kicking off a new study commissioned by EPSO. And it's about the future of digital health in EU. And the kickoff meeting will be next week, but I'm very much looking forward to implement this study. And the kind of a objective or methodology of the study is that we are going to have a comprehensive look into 4 regions, which is Estonia, Slovenia, Oulu in Finland, and Sofia in Bulgaria. And we kind of try to understand what makes the digital health in those countries to be developed, and also try to, based on those cases, try to draw some conclusions to the EU e-health digitalization topic. So that's probably why I'm here. The second reason might be that as Estonia is regarded to be quite well kind of developed in terms of digital society and digital services, then healthcare is, of course, part of this digital society, and that's the area I'm day-to-day working here in Estonia. We have formed a cluster, connected health cluster here, and I can really say that if you are dealing in healthcare digital innovation in Estonia, then you are most probably a member or part of the cluster. So our coverage here is really quite good. About the healthcare issues, then healthcare is probably the worst sector to innovate. If you kind of list different factors you need for innovation, then you lack all of them almost in healthcare. So it's really challenging, and also reading the policy brief you have prepared for this event, you also mentioned this, that it's not going so easy in all and every sector. I also do agree with Matthew that digitalization itself is not or can't be the aim, meaning that if we look, for example, in healthcare, there are quite a lot of bad processes, and you should actually go and redesign the processes with the help of different digital tools, and not to top up the existing inefficient system by digital services. And that's really challenging to change or to catalyze the change in the healthcare system using digital tools. And if we look at the healthcare system, then the challenges are huge, and really the kind of a mindset should be changed towards more kind of a preventive, patient-centered and integrated care. And you talk here about citizens. In healthcare, we still talk about patients. And this is also the kind of a change in the mindset we probably have to go through.
So just a quick reflection. So do you think that healthcare should be looking into, e-government in general for inspiration, or do you think that e-government could learn some things from healthcare, or do you think it has to be integrated, which is, of course, the answer I don't hope for, because then it is cross-sectoral innovation, and that's even more difficult, perhaps, than solving real issues. So what do you think? What is the relationship between the sector and the more broad perspective?
I think that e-health is part of the e-governance, because in health sector, I think the most things could be done at national or regional level, mainly. And that's the reason why you can do a lot centrally, but you can also benefit of building good public-private partnerships, like the cluster I'm representing here.
Okay, that's interesting. We can also come back to that because there are territorial differences.
Yeah.
So in Denmark, for instance, much of the primary healthcare is the local municipality, which is actually responsible for this, where in much other regions it's a regional or even national mandate to do this.
Systems differ a lot in
Yes,
healthcare.
yes. Okay, very good. So, David, let's jump to another spot on the British Isles and hear from your perspective. What can you, let's say, well, tell us a little bit about yourself, but also how can you add to what we have heard now from your perspective?
Yes, Martin. So I'm approaching this session very much from the standpoint of industrial strategy and economic development in the region I represent in central England. Very different to Matthew's region. Although we have England's 9th largest city within our region, we have the county of Warwickshire, which contains a vast rural area and a lot of small towns. Also, from an ESPON point of view, I'm lead stakeholder for the RESI project around regional strategies, so that's further angle I'm going to come to this. In my introductory points, I've thought about the 3 objectives of the session and just give some introduction as to what's happening in the Coventry and Warwickshire region. So the first point is really access to high-speed internet is increasingly now being described as the UK's 4th utility, and very much the digital infrastructure being a key enabler of economic growth. In Coventry, we have a digital strategy to drive economic growth and public sector reform. More widely in my region, the West Midlands Combined Authority is setting up a digital board to oversee now the development of digital infrastructure on a regional level. Now, one of the challenges, this may surprise some people, 92% of Coventry business premises have access to superfast broadband. So some 8% still do not have access to superfast broadband. So what are our priorities? Very strong emphasis on expansion of fibre broadband and the 5G mobile network now as an enabler of smart growth, amongst other things, particularly the development of Industry 4.0. Coventry Council, we're currently in a partnership agreement with a broadband provider to try and acquire, upgrade and expand our fibre network. We're also a pilot region nationally to deliver a voucher scheme to connect SMEs in Coventry and Warwickshire to 1 gigabit capable broadband, another key enabler of, we see above all access to fast and reliable broadband being a crucial enabler for enhancing the international competitiveness of our local businesses. But it's also about combining agendas. So, other key services that are currently being digitalised in the transport sector, looking at digital intelligent road signs to support the flow of traffic. From a tourism standpoint, wayfinding points to assist tourists to navigate around our region. Also the development of digital apps for similar purposes. Using the digital infrastructure to pilot and test connected and autonomous vehicles locally. Planning perspective, developing a portal to show planning developments. That's not just vital to inform the public, but it's also vital to try and maximise social economic impacts of new development, local people accessing jobs, local businesses accessing procurement opportunities. From a training point of view, digital tools to help upgrade our skills levels. Health point of view, using customer records. Nationally, from a business support standpoint, a lot of business support is being delivered through the Businesses Great Britain website. So, some of the key considerations, as were touched on earlier, sensitivities around data ownership, vital. A lot of services are not from scratch. They're developed from existing services. What is driving it? Our authority has a very active transformation team, which is driven by the head of ICT and our chief executive. However, one barrier to take up is skills. 21% of UK adults, for example, lack basic digital skills. So it is a challenge to actually get take up. And the way we're approaching it is the public sector has a key role to pump prime digital infrastructure improvements. However, it is about very much stimulating subsequent private sector investment and the growth of digital infrastructure. So, from the point of view of how effective it is, well, the Coventry digital strategy is a 5-year plan. We're very early into it. Mm-hmm. It's it's very difficult to evaluate the success. However, one of the questions was, what could be useful at an EU level? And I think it's important to evaluate the successes and shortcomings of digital services. One example could be in business support services. Support services to SMEs are increasingly becoming digitalised in the UK. I suspect that might be the case across the EU. And it's very much about, I think, understanding, well, what's the optimum balance between face-to-face and digital interaction, and what is the true return on public sector investment, and how can we better use the digital infrastructure to then, generate the growth of our key sectors and stimulate further private sector investment.
Very good. So you really point to these different layers almost physically. So we need to plow down super fast broadband. That's a given. We need the wireless there. That's a given. So when that's done, then you have to find some services, and it's never just copy-paste. You have to somehow integrate. And then there's the question you touch upon, the ecosystem. You talk about SMEs, and so it's probably not just done with a website, and you can go into a help desk, or you can go online. But there's also how do you maintain the stakeholders landscape around these, how to connect them locally, nationally, globally, and so on. So lots of layers there. And the question is then, of course, how do you address, well, preferably all of them at once, with the support from the national and international level. Okay, we will definitely come back to this, because I think the instruments that are available to support that kind of integrated transformation, or the strategies, would be very interesting to discuss, because that's very action-oriented. All right, so Jean-Francois, do you hear us with lag or without lag? Do we see you? Should we use Skype? Pull out the mobile and FaceTime. Ask Silicon Valley for help. No, I'm just kidding. but I mean, this is in fact one of the paradoxes, right? The convenience of these big services that you can just use, that you are using every day. And then when you have to infrastructure for big things like, government services, for the things that are in our constitutions and in our, local regulations, how much effort do we want to establish that again in the digital, and how much can we just use off the shelf from commercial services? It's a very, very, very relevant, I think, reflection point here. Laurent, maybe you could give us again your perspective, now focusing on the digitalization of services, and we've heard, I think, reflections.
I do hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Do you hear? What is the time where you are? What is the lag? We need. This is like speaking to the International Space Station. We need standards for synchronizing. So if I hold up a clock, I can tell the newspaper of the day. Are we on the same day? I will have Laurent introduce himself and give a perspective here, then come back to you, Jean-Francois. Apologies. Laurent, so we heard clearly reflections here from also the policy points that you mentioned, this nice overview of policy recommendations on the different levels of government. So, maybe you could also here introduce your professional background, because you also have a professional perspective on this coming in. Like we had the healthcare innovation, you have a particular, let's say, sensitization to this.
It's,
and how do you
I'm
see
sorry,
this?
I think there is a delay of something like 30 to 40 seconds.
Fantastic. Okay, so in 30 seconds, when I say this, you start speaking. Okay, introduce yourself and your background.
So the only way
with
for
the
me
SIP
will
and so on.
be to start speaking and not to stop.
That is another way, yes. But when you hear the cue, you just start. Okay. I think, Laurent, if you do the short version, and we anticipate, Jean-Francois starting to speak in 20 seconds. So,
very good. So if Jean-Francois, if he jumps in, if you can hear me 40 seconds down the line, then very good. So thanks very much. I'm perhaps not as pessimistic as Matthew here. I think a lot has been done. I think we are starting to move, but a lot still has to be done. I think the public sector, public institutions are still lagging behind in the digital transition, but that's also because the speed of change has just increased. I think innovation is moving faster and faster. Solutions are piloted and then rolled out much quicker than it was done previously. So the life cycles, in a way, of innovations have become shorter and shorter. Also, as citizens and as digital citizens, our expectations are kind of have risen in terms of what we can expect from interacting with our friends, with our colleagues, but also with businesses and with government. So we can order books online and they appear tomorrow. So there's a certain immediacy, I think, to using digital services that we're quite familiar with on a personal and professional level that is not always reflected, I think, in terms of how we interact with government. So this digital transformation is really leading to a more kind of user-centric approach. It allows direct communication with individuals, with citizens, and it allows kind of the tailoring of services to individual citizens. So I think the challenge for the public sector is that this really impacts all service areas. So it's not just something mobility where you have a new mode of transport, you have a new technology for buses so that you roll out that has an impact on your transport policy, but it impacts all service areas from education to healthcare to mobility. And one of the challenges is that, of course, there are a lot of legacy systems in the public sector. I think Matthew mentioned that in the beginning. So whereas progress has been made, there's still a lot to do, and there's kind of this constant game of catch-up. So what we've done really at ESPON is to try to take a snapshot over the summer of where we stand. Different cities across Europe, we conducted a survey to try to understand what is the state of digital transition of different services. And what we wanted to understand is to see whether, let's say, smaller cities are digitalizing at a different rate compared to larger cities, and also whether there are differences between different parts of Europe. We've heard previously that the way different services are digitalized varies from one country to another. So in terms of healthcare, for example, in some countries this is more centralized than in others. So there is some potential unevenness across from a territorial perspective that I think it's important to be aware of. And I think the message is not that every small town and small city needs to digitalize all its services, but it needs to understand which services it should focus on as a priority, because some services might be provided at different levels. So in a way, it's really a paradigm shift in terms of how cities and also regional and national governments engage with their citizens, how they deliver services. It raises all sorts of questions in terms of course, trust and familiarity, security issues, and so on. So I think there are many challenges. But it's very important for us that this sense of urgency, I think, is there. I think at all levels of governments, and that there's a coordinated approach to proceeding in this digital transition. So it is not about going it alone as a local borough or a local city, but trying to understand where do you position yourself within your local ecosystem, within the national ecosystem, and even within the global ecosystem. Mm-hmm.
Very good. So one of the issues that you're raising is that the timelines are different. So while technology changes very fast and imposes expectations to service delivery, then at the same time, well, organizations change very slowly. I mean, we may even talk generations. If if you are heading a ministry like the permanent secretary or something, I mean, what took you there is probably not going to, be something that you want to completely disrupt, because there's also there's a whole, let's say, culture around governance and being a public servant. So and this goes, I'm quite sure, for all levels of government. So the organization, and this reflects back to what we heard from the healthcare sector, the organizational perspective actually becomes a key element in managing this innovation. Okay, very good. We have some lots of topics to touch upon, but let's return to, Jean-Francois, if you can, break in. We will give you the floor. and please, if the colleagues could advise what to do, but if you hear us, if you're out there, please join the conversation. So Jean-Francois has been instrumental in setting up some of the instruments around competitiveness, some of the more accessible project creation instruments, so funding some of these collaboration and partnerships around actually bringing different stakeholders together for years, and now is working as deputy head of unit in the e-government unit in the European Commission. So it would be fantastic to hear the views there. But let's return to the poll. Can we have the results, perhaps? Right, okay. This is not really surprising. So citizen engagement participation is key. And I think in this political climate in the world, every elected politician can subscribe. And I think the governments that are trying to then deliver on this, let's say, the connect between public services and...
I see the live video and not the... But I have the sound with a huge delay, and you clearly also hear me with a big delay. If you give me a thumbs up when I can start, and I will start. Okay, then I will start now because this I see it. But the sound is very delayed compared to what I can see. So, okay, so thank you very much. Sorry everybody for this little technical hiccups, and that's the defect of trying to do it remotely. And we see indeed the limitation of the ICT technology and teleworking and all kinds of issues. Still, if the Commission has published in 2013 the action plan that is calling for an acceleration of the transformation of the public sector. But today we have, for all public authorities, whether national, regional or local authorities, we have a huge window of opportunity because of what has happened earlier this year. In September, end of September, we had the Digital Summit where the member states have, at the heads of state level, call on the modernization of public administrations. This was followed by the ministerial conference in Tallinn, where the member states signed an agreement, a declaration calling also for the public sector transformation with a series of priority, with a series of principle applied for the user centricity. And then at the end, we had the council conclusion mid of October, that means a few weeks ago, where again, member states have reiterated back to the Commission the importance of the public sector transformation, public sector modernization. So what does this mean? So I can explain very roughly and very quickly what the action plan was about, and you will see an understanding, I think, because I was listening to all your presentations earlier, even though with a delay, and you will see how much indeed what you're doing and what we are preaching and pushing goes along the same line. What we want is that we break the silos between the different actors, whether different sectors or whether different political level, region, local, or national level. Why do we want that? It's because you will see a dramatic efficiency gain. You will see a sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge that enables the delivery of far better, far more efficient, and far more user-minded services in order to make sure we deliver what the citizens want. The Tallinn Declaration goes exactly along the same line, and in particular, it has this user centricity principle that are enshrined in the declaration in the annex, where it is calling for interaction to be done digitally, where services need to be accessible, secured, where we need to work in order to reduce administrative burden. I will not go through the entire list because I think we have wasted enough time with this technical issue. Now, what will the Commission do out of this? We will start now measuring. So we've had the benchmarking that has been published recently. It's done at the national level, where we are measuring the user centricity of the services. We're measuring the transparency of the administration and in particular the capacity of reusing information, meaning reducing the administrative burden. And we also measure a series of services specifically for businesses and citizens. So what are the main drivers we have today, and what is the Commission indeed working, delivering? So the first one, hopefully many of you know, are the different services and what we are doing inside the Connecting Europe Facility program, where we are offering to authorities services that will enable your local or regional services to become immediately interoperable and work cross-border, whether it is for eID, e-delivery, e-signature, e-invoicing, machine translation. So those are the different elements we are offering today. And there will be more coming in this year, like e-archiving. Politically, what is coming in the near future is the introduction of the once-only principle. In the Single Digital Gateway regulation that was presented by the Commission earlier this year, it is still under negotiation, but under Article 12, we introduced the notion of the once-only and how the once-only could apply. This will mean that administration at all levels will have the capacity to retrieve the information from the other administrations when a citizen agrees for this transfer. So it is not done automatically, it is on the request of the citizens. But this will fundamentally transform how administrations are working today, because they will have to work together, they will have to be in a position to share the information in order to facilitate the life of citizens and businesses. And this is why, again, we go back to the user centricity. What we also see, and this was announced with the action plan in May last year, we see more and more what we call atomic software or basic services, a modularity that is appearing, where instead of providing big, massive service, you have a series of small services, like the one we're doing, for instance, under the CEF. And those one can be reused like Lego block and be recomposed in order to deliver much better services. What it means that administration relies on the others, start to reuse and start to share common infrastructure, common cloud infrastructure, if we want to use that word. And the trend is to go towards a government as a platform. But when we talk about this government as a platform, it has to be seen for the different level. It can be a regional platform that enables the municipality, it's particularly the small municipalities, certainly have access to sophisticated services. So it's a fundamental change we see. We're trying to push for this transformation and to get much more out of the resources, and I would say it's still the scarce resources administrations have. Just to cut it short, because I see that you're trying to push me to go a little bit fast. If we look at what is coming in the future, we see, so first of all, we have activity in the research program, but what we see is this transformation will transform also fundamentally the role of the public administrations. Like it is happening today in the private sector, the public sector will be faced with the same issue. I would push the two extremes to talk about the relevance of the public sector, because if you have intermediary delivering the services, all of a sudden citizens might wonder why they're paying taxes, because they don't interact with the administration, they interact with a private actor. And for that, we have just launched a study, and I really call you on following that study and participating in that study, on understanding what will be the future of the government beyond 2030, when the whole transformation has happened and where services start to be delivered by all kinds of actors. So I think I will stop here. I will still listen to you, but clearly I can see you live, but I cannot hear you live. I have a 40 seconds delay, and so just to let you know. So if you want to interact with me, shake your hands so I know that 30 seconds later I can start talking, okay? Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very, very much for this very relevant intervention. So let's say I will wave at you, because I think this will happen in more or less real time, and then you speak. Okay, so we take. I think now we have clearly, the efficiency perspective, the optimization perspective, versus what we saw here in the top question or the top topic, the engagement, the perceived usefulness of this, let's say, optimization exercise. And I think it's relevant to discuss how these two come together. So for instance, if I may reflect on what we heard from the Commission side, okay, so digital Lego blocks, fantastic. I did my PhD together with Lego, looking into how the mobile is changing the world, love it. The question is, if this is going to transform public government in, say, 5 years, who is going to govern the formation of these Lego blocks? We have discussed the role of the global, of the US, of China, of the global South. Okay, so can Europe just come and say, this is what we believe, use it? Or will we just make a bubble in Europe? This is a real, I think, discussions to be had. Who will govern these fundamental mechanisms of connecting? This is a very good question. Of course, we have standardization organizations, but that's a mess in and of itself. So I think we should come back to the governance of these mechanisms of interoperability. And then, of course, the question, we heard limited resources being mentioned. I think that's a dominating fact in public sector. Okay, so we should innovate, right, but who funds it? I mean, do you take it from, the primary care? Do you take it from, where does that come from? Does the Commission intend that just to come out from the various instruments or how? So I think that's also a very fundamental question, if you go back to the questions we have here. So I would say the top three, so how do we connect the bureaucratic, the technocratic view from above with the perceived? How do we then transform that into innovations and transformation strategies, and how do we fund it? Let's focus on that for the remainder of the time we have here. Maybe a few concrete questions. Did we also have some questions that have been coming in from here? Yeah, okay. What is really needed to shift to post-technocratic adaptive change? Who should take the lead? What skills? Money, partnerships. That's basically summing up what I just said. Sorry I did it so verbosely. But I think we should return now to our panelists and really take these three elements at a time. So how do we, in a way, government is bureaucratic by design. It's meant to be. It's meant to be transparent. It's meant to be, accountable and so on. So how do you keep the balance when you move forward? Because we can go with Singularity University and just disrupt. Fantastic. But then where goes the accountability? Where goes the transparency? Where goes the connection? So maybe you could comment.
Well, it's a really interesting idea that you conflated bureaucracy with accountability and openness, because so much of the bureaucratic elements of government defeat the transparent and accountable elements of government. Right?
Well, that's the rationale for having a bureaucracy, isn't it? That's to be accountable and not just doing things, with your friends.
So if you want to talk about citizen engagement and participation, so here's my pitch, right? So if you imagine government and democracy as an hourglass, so we start off with debates, that then produces us votes, which forms us government, which create laws, which then spit out regulations and then services, right? So from kind of democracy through to services. Law is basically code, isn't it? In this scenario, this will happen. So imagine you are applying for your passport or you are paying your driving license fine, and as a citizen, you can dig into that law and you can find out why is it that I owe my French regional area 80 euros rather than the other French regional area in which I also speeded 60 euros. Who made that decision? And how can I change that decision come the election time? Now, digital enables us to provide a service which is fundamentally different in precisely that way. We can join up democratic debates with laws, with the delivery of public services. Why we're not confuses me slightly, frankly. But I think it's because we've been approaching it in the wrong way. And The adaptive change concept, by the way, is explained in a far more easy to understand and much more eloquent way than I can in a book called Leadership on the Line by Heifetz and some other dude. They're American. It's a great book. So do read it. But it's so heartening to hear how, on a European level, the debate around user centricity appears to be one. The debate around government as a platform appears to be one. Yet let us not pretend that these are not without political choices.
Right.
Lego is a proprietary system. You can buy your government as a platform from Microsoft, I'm sure. And I'm sure if you take all of Microsoft's Lego bricks and put them together, you will have a brilliant Microsoft system. And if you want Microsoft to run your local area, maybe that's the right thing to do. But those are all ideological choices. Personally, in Hackney, we are working with small digital agencies, most of whom work in Hackney. All of our intellectual property is open source. Everything's on GitHub. Everything's shared on G Suite. But again, these are ideological choices. Where I live, 10 miles up the road, has outsourced the entire delivery of public services to a private company for the next 10 years. That is also an ideological choice affecting our ability to digitize. I think by making this political, by making it about adaptive change, we make this discussion far more interesting for the people we depend upon to make the important decisions to deliver this agenda.
May I ask the innovation expert, Kitty? So I mean, you mentioned this is basically, if I conflate all you said, we're innovating legal frameworks, right? Because bureaucracy reflects legal frameworks. That is what's happening. You look down on what's the law, and then we operate. So if I may reflect that over to the innovation perspective and the healthcare, which is one of the most meticulously regulated areas because people die if you don't follow the law. How can you even innovate in such an environment where everything is laws that are changed like every 50 years or maybe every century?
Yes, if we talk about the disruptive innovation, then looking like Uber or Taxify or whatever service, Airbnb, then they first actually break the laws, and then the laws recreate themselves under new conditions. And if we take healthcare, then of course, as you mentioned, the citizens' kind of expectations have grown, because if you normally use digital services which are well designed, easy to use, you start to expect the similar experience from the public services and healthcare services. But how to reach there is really a huge question. In healthcare sector, it's one more kind of aspect which comes to my mind, adding to all other factors which you talk about, the governance related issues, which is actually the evidence-based, which means that however your new digital or whatever service might be, you have to provide the proof that it is evidence-based. But if you kind of start from scratch, a new service, then how you can get it proved? You probably need to get the service clinically validated. Now the question is about like you mentioned in your policy brief, we need serious development, testing, and rollout environments.
Yes.
And do we have them enough in healthcare? Probably not. And that's the issue, actually, to create the evidence for a new services. And probably the new digital services cannot be assessed in the same way as we have used in assessing new medicines or medical kind of devices. It needs a new kind of a way how we roll out the new services to healthcare.
So that points to a very, I think, important element in this innovation dynamics, that you need then practices, and you need maybe also even government support for trying out new things. Yeah. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, maybe what you were talking about with the SMEs. I mean, how do you even orchestrate this? So an SME says, we have a grand idea. Then what? There should be somewhere to put it, right? So
I mean, I'm just going back to the question really with a few thoughts. I mean, one of the questions on there was, who leads? I personally, it feels to me like it needs leadership at all levels, actually. Some services, for example, you can adopt a pan-Europe approach to. Some services, like the business support service I related to earlier, could be a national issue. You know, some things are a local issue. From a funding standpoint, funding is a barrier, certainly within the UK. One thing we've done in Coventry and Warwickshire, as this is an EU seminar, we have used ERDF funding, partly to enhance our broadband infrastructure in Coventry and Warwickshire, but also we've used ERDF funding as well to actually deliver non-financial support to SMEs as well as financial support to SMEs, to give them better guidance and actual support on how better to utilise ICT and how better to, to take up broadband infrastructure. That is public funding to address a key area of market failure. But the other point around innovation that you raised, Martin, partnership for me is absolutely key, and it's important for public sector bodies to work with the likes of broadband providers, but also companies in the private sector on innovation. So one of the points I raised earlier around autonomous vehicles, if government or local, that's local and national government, does not engage with the private sector, how do they know what's really possible?
Right.
And how do they know that they're therefore putting public finances into the art of the possible and not just wasting public money? So that partnership working, I think, is absolutely key, as well as the availability of public funding to pump prime.
So a direct question or reflection, could that be then, are the instruments, the RDF, the competitiveness, the innovation and research actions, the instruments, are they useful in this, maybe just across the board, to hear which instruments are you using, or what can you recommend to the colleagues here, and do they play together? Because that's, of course, one of the key things. Like the instruments that are available for the Commission side also tend to be focused on different areas. But what you explain, I think unanimously, is the need for coordination among these initiatives. So that's really also a leadership role, you could say, on the European level. So I don't know if you could give concrete examples of, are you using some of the instruments for citizen engagement, for the whether it's private or public? The commercial side, there are also stakeholders in the communities, right? So are the instruments being used? The CEF, the Connecting Europe facilities, are using in your tenders? I guess very few are up until now, but the vision is that this is going to happen. We will have something to put when you go to the open source community or to Microsoft or whoever. We can actually put some things in there. But how to get there? Can the instruments, the funding instruments, be used to that? I open the floor for the panel.
I'll just talk about use of ERDF in Coventry and Warwickshire. Priority 1, exclusively directed at research and innovation. It's very much aimed at supporting SMEs to develop new innovative products and technologies. And a lot of the SMEs we've supported in Coventry and Warwickshire so far, it is aimed at developing digital products and technologies which service sectors such as health, also the manufacturing sector.
So may I just reflect, does that then challenge government? We heard about the examples of how the private sector can challenge. So do you go for that?
I would hope that some of the successes from the programme, that national government then understands what the successes are, understands the area of market failure that programme is addressing, but also develops an understanding of areas of market failure that are not being addressed, and looks at how best to address them. Yeah. And also, it comes back to the point, which areas does government need to address, which areas does the private sector need to invest, and actually which areas does government need to work with the private sector to address in partnership.
Laurent, may I ask, in your surveying this area, can you see some instruments standing out as really excellent in funding some of this transition, bringing the stakeholders together, maybe locally, maybe across? Do any of the instruments sort of stand out, or do you have any recommendations for maybe the ones shaping instruments or shaping on a national level the usage of those instruments? Anything stands out from your work there?
I think in the particular survey we've done for the policy brief, we didn't go into the detail of the specific instruments. But perhaps let me pick up one of the questions, if I may, that was up on the screen earlier. I think it was linked to whether digitalized public services mean job cuts in public administration. I think this is almost the elephant in the room. I think it came up also this morning. I think what's important to understand is that digitalization will result in the loss of some job functions and job roles, because simply computers are better at completing certain tasks than humans are. And these are not just low-skilled jobs, these are also jobs like accountants and doctors and lawyers, where it's a lot of information processing and how you apply that. So this is one of the main challenges that any organization faces, and also particularly the public sector. What are to try to identify which potential roles, which function might become obsolete? According to some studies, I think it's up to 40% of a function which become obsolete in the next 10, 15 years. And then it's really to understand, what are the new roles that we will need within an organization? What are the particular skills that we need? What is the skills base of my existing staff? What do we need to do to perhaps reskill them to ensure that they can take on some of these new digital skills to really harness the new way of delivering services digitally? One of the things that came out of the survey is also that an increasing number of cities are using the data that comes from these digital services in decision-making processes, and this is really one of the keys to improve the service delivery, is to understand how services are being delivered, and how you can optimize that. And in order to do that, you really need the capacity to essentially crunch the data. So, I mean, data in itself, we haven't, I think, talked so much about big data, but essentially big data is one of the keys to this. I mean, all these interactions generate data. And one of the main challenges is to harness the insights from that data. So you need to develop the right algorithms. You need to invest in your data scientist capacity in-house. So some roles within the organizations will have those more let's say, advanced. We'll need to have those advanced skills to really make the most of this digital transformation. And perhaps just to finish off, I think this is also a challenge really that I think even as ESPON we have to take on. I mean, at EGTC we're quite a small organization. We're 22, but we are both kind of transforming our own organization in terms of adopting digital tools to engage more directly with our stakeholders and our different target audiences. But we're also looking at ways in which big data and this digitalization can help us to deliver better evidence for policymaking.
Yeah, and of course the question is, where does that capacity get built up? Because that doesn't necessarily happen in every municipality around the world. I mean, there are 500,000 local governments. I mean, you should certainly have capacity to work in this space, but the question is then, what are the actual job functions? I don't think, also what you're saying, we don't see exactly what they are and where they are. Okay, so may I ask for the next vote as we're going into the closing of this? I think one of the main objectives of this session is also to point to some action. So where do you go to solve these things, and what do you want to do next? I mean, okay, we have identified tons of problems, but the question is then, how do we address them? So I invite you now to take a pick here. What action should be taken to move forward in a, let's say, a good manner? Should we have the practice-led? I mean, show us the examples of what's working, knowing well that the best practice is still being shaped. Should we know about strategy? I think, again, that's best practice, but on a strategic level, maybe on a municipal level, regional. Initiatives that can be had and carried out, even if you don't have a big team, even if you don't have 22, but maybe you have half a person. So what can we do in that sense? What about the European perspective? Understanding more, how can you utilize the instruments that are there? How can you influence so that they get even more targeted towards your needs? And finally, I think that was actually the main concern here. How can we ensure that this focus on not the systems, but the life between the systems really get highlighted? So I invite you now, and I can see almost half of the ones that were there before have already cast their vote. So going into this, we're reaching top of the hour. I don't want to keep you from the lunch. Maybe we can use this as a springboard for some final reflections, if not conclusions, from the panelists. And this goes as well from you, Jean-Francois. When you hear the sound, I will have your reflections at the end of the colleagues here in the panel. So let's in fact see. Can we any last votes before we show here? So we give a little bit of guidance to the colleagues up here. Okay, I think we can show the results. Interesting. So good examples of strategy and good example of practice. And then what can Europe do? Well, that's something you want to find out by yourselves. Initiatives on low resources, I don't know if that reflects that the people who actually here are the ones who have invested more. So maybe you can reflect on, how can we convey practical, where do you go to get practical best practice advice on strategy as well as implementation? So where do you get your inspiration? Where do you get your next steps from? And maybe some final conclusions on the whole discussion. You first, Martin.
So in my last job, I wrote our digital strategy for Buckinghamshire County Council, which you can find on the web on a Saturday at my kitchen table. And in my current job, we don't have a digital strategy. Why? Because Buckinghamshire was at the start of a journey. I needed a specific way to inform the decisions we were going to make and a reference point to understand why we'd made those decisions. Whereas in Hackney, we have embedded the thinking about technology in the strategies and plans for each individual service. So we don't have a separate digital strategy. We have a strategy for place, and technology is enabling that. But any strategy which helps you decide what you're not going to do and doesn't make grand plans for what you're going to do much further than 6 months away is a sensible digital strategy. In terms of examples of good practices and innovations, I mean, I constantly look to Estonia, constantly look to Singapore. There's some really interesting stuff going on in Boston too. Personally, everything that I'm proud of, we talk about either on our blog or on my personal blog, so you can find it all, and I'm happy to talk to anyone via social media about any specific examples. But we have 2 key principles that I was reflecting on when we were talking earlier. One of our key principles is think big, act small. And our second key principle is fail in a fortnight. If your answer is 10 million euros or more, then you're probably asking the wrong question.
Thank you very much. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the reflections from me. So, key factors about implementing a strategy. Sort of agree wholeheartedly with what Matt's just said, and just some views of mine. Have the will and the drive to transform, and the will to learn internationally. Develop effective public and private sector partnerships. But also, I think certainly the message from Coventry and Warwickshire is, see digital infrastructure and access to data. See it very much as the enabler, not just the solution on its own, in terms of the enabler to regional economic growth, the enabler to better public services to meet consumer expectations. Those would be my reflections.
Thank you. So, Kitty, some concrete reflections on best practice?
What I have to say, stay here or you're welcome back to get more hints about how Estonia has been implemented the kind of a digital, I should say, not the digital strategy as a document, but the kind of a vision of digital society, because it has been there for a long and taking the shape of different documents, but it's still kind of there, and it's like a certain type of belief in Estonia, the belief in digital society. We do have health strategies and all those documents. But I do agree with Matthew that starting kind of a hands-on things and going incrementally, kind of improving and trying out things is more important here to move further in a better pace. And what about good practices and innovations? Then stay tuned. We are just starting the ESPON study. We study 4 regions on e-health and e-health services and the future of e-health. So I'm very happy to come back and discuss about the results and the lessons we learned.
Thank you very much. So, Jean-Francois, are you there? You can...
Okay, I guess you want me to intervene.
Yes.
So I come in. So it works like that. Except I haven't heard the last words. In terms of conclusion, what I would say that, first of all, we should all work together and we should use as much as possible the different knowledge and the different capacity of each of us to intervene. At European level, we have very little capacity to intervene at the local level, but at the same time, at the local level, you can benefit from what is happening at the EU level and anything in between. I think that's what I am trying to say. But also, I would say to everybody is that there are 2 key aspects we should never forget. First of all, it is not a matter to digitize procedure, digitize law. ICT technology enabled to rethink completely the way we are doing things and the role of the different actors. And maybe it is time to rethink that. As I said often, as a French person, I say very often we need to get out of the Napoleon model to rethink how administration should work and what their role should be. And the last thing that comes more from the English and not the French language, we should not forget that we are civil servants. So we are all here to serve the citizens, and we must make sure that what we do is for the citizens. It's not for us, and it is not for the ICT developers. They need to also understand the way citizens think and what they want. Too often things are so complex, so difficult that nobody is able to use them effectively. Maybe they are forced to use it, so they will use it, but certainly they will not see great value from the public authorities. And we should not forget the private sector are doing things that is training the citizens, and they expect the same from the public sector. That's the way I would close my speech. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Laurent, may I ask you to reflect on the same, but maybe be very specific, also to how can the ESPON research be used in guidance? Where can you, I mean, in the coming months, in the coming phases of your work, how can that be, you know, sources of exactly this best practice, especially on the strategic level?
Mm-hmm. I think on a strategic level, if you look at the first question in terms of the key factors really to implement a digital strategy, I think leadership is really key in any organization. I think there has to be, the driver has to be there. I think so the realization has to be there that there's an urgency to act. So that's at the top level. But then also, I don't think it's necessarily about finding particular solutions, technical solutions to implement within your organizations as a priority. I think it's really about investing in your people. I think fundamentally we need to get everyone in our public organizations to take on some digital skills. We need to invest in developing this capacity. And then it's just, I think, learning by doing. I think it's, in the previous panel we heard that, I mean, one of the ways to develop trust and also to accelerate, if you like, the uptake of digital services is to let people use them. And I think then it's learning by doing, and I think some of that skepticism will then wane. So I think in terms of also for ESPON, I think you heard, so one of the projects that we are kicking off next week is on e-health. So we will be looking more at how digital is impacting on the transformation of different services at different levels of government. We have other activities that will also start next year. We'll be looking at how big data can be used to promote development along growth corridors. That's a project that's scheduled to start next year. So clearly, I think we'll hope to contribute to the debate, both in terms of insights on how public sector organizations are transforming digitally, but also in terms of how we can produce evidence through new means, so harnessing big data and using that evidence for informing policy makings and decision-making processes.
Very good. Not very surprising, but very, let's say, very promising that there are people actually putting much of this research together in snack bites so that you can go wherever you need it. All right, so we are coming to the end of this session. Allow me to do a few closing reflections. Clearly, we're not there yet. I heard the Commission colleague mentioning, when the transformation has been concluded or has been, I think probably one of the things that have come forward now is these different timelines. So we can expect this to really take a lot of time because people don't change that fast. Now, at the same time, we also have to keep things simple. So that we're not trying to, while this is a huge issue, we're not trying to solve it all at once. And I think increasingly you almost said, think global, act local. So we're back in the 70s when we're talking about climate. And it's this, digitalization has this, air about urgency. We'll be out of jobs, we will be, eaten by technology or, other people on this globe economically if we don't do something. But there's no plan. Because everything needs to happen in a concerted fashion. Just to give you a small anecdote to end on. In Denmark, the environmental ministry began in the late 70s to have the first plans and regulations around the reuse of plastic and circular economy, which came to be the whole wind power green growth bonanza. And in the Danish Smart Cities Network, we had a session there comparing the two timelines. And one of these by now fairly older guys, I put the question to him, okay, so Stig, that's his name. If you look at the digital transformation, where are we compared to the, let's say, the climate, the green environmental agenda back in '79 when you were a young lad in the ministry and you put in your first, whatever it's called, this scoping paper for the minister and so on. And he said, okay, we're not even there yet. I think that was a very, very sobering remark for someone who could see the similarities and, the scope. This is a global, Paul, he outlined all the big dynamics going. It's global scope. It's about our global well-being, including the planet. And we're not there yet. So maybe something to think about when still, it's fail in a fortnight and there's this sense of urgency and we don't have any money. That is among the key challenges, I think, that we're facing. Give a hand to the panel, online and on stage, and thank you very much for joining.